Hey, it's Jacob from Savant. When you're working with data, it doesn't always come from a single tidy source. A lot of the time, you're dealing with multiple files. You might have a folder full of monthly CSVs, an Excel workbook with a dozen tabs, or a SharePoint folder where a new report drops every week. Maybe you need to combine them all, pull in only the latest file, or match tabs dynamically so you don't have to reconfigure your workflow every time something changes. That's where things can get complicated unless you're using Savant. Our datasets lets you bring in all of those files and tabs in one step. In Alteryx, the process is pretty manual for an automation tool and is usually left for advanced users. You point the directory tool to a folder, it gives you a list of everything in it, and then you feed that into dynamic input so it can actually read the files. That's the easy route if every single file has the exact same schema. But as soon as things get messy, maybe the columns don't line up, the tabs are named differently, or the files live in the cloud, you're into batch macro territory. You'll end up building workarounds just to make sure it runs without errors. In Savant, you skip all of that complexity. Let's walk through it using a real example with multiple CSV files in a SharePoint folder. First, I create a new dataset and select my system. In this example, I'll use SharePoint, but the same applies to OneDrive, Google Drive, Amazon, SFTP, and any other popular file sharing system. We can see that we are by default configured to connect to text files, and I'll click Folder URL to configure my dataset to connect to a folder in SharePoint instead of a static file. I'll copy the folder link directly from my browser and paste it into Savant. Then we have to set a file pattern. We can use something like *.csv to grab every CSV in the folder, or something specific like electric vehicle population _202*.csv to target certain files that relate to any files related to 2020 or afterwards. If you aren't familiar, the asterisk is a wildcard that replaces any value in its place. Savant instantly scans the folder and will show me a sample of data from the files that match my file pattern. One cool thing to note is that Savant offers a similar file pattern feature to select tab names in an Excel file. And if your column names aren't consistent, you can use common headers to match the fields you actually care about, even across different file schemas. No batch macro required. If you want to keep track of where each row came from, you just add metadata columns, things like file name, tab name, and modified date. Lastly, you can even tell Savant to grab only the most recent file in a folder, perfect for monthly reports. It can scan subfolders, skip over unnecessary header rows, or handle headerless files. So the difference is pretty clear. In Alteryx, this kind of workflow needs multiple tools and often a macro or two just to handle special cases. In Savant, it's all built into the dataset itself, from matching and unioning to handling messy schemas and adding metadata. Whether you're working with one file, a dozen tabs, or an entire folder that changes every day, Savant's datasets makes it fast and frustration-free.